Rex thought he ran the school, until the quiet new girl made his enforcers hit the pavement before lunch ended. She didn't raise her voice, didn't break a sweat, just dismantled their rule with surgical calm. Welcome to Tales by Ezra. Let's uncover what really happened. The rusted hinges of the old pickup truck groaned a mournful welcome as Maya stepped out onto the cracked asphalt of Northwood High's student parking lot. It was a far cry from the manicured lawns and gleaming glass of her last school, a place she'd only inhabited for 6 months before her father, David, had decided another move was necessary. This town, smaller, quieter, was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where the echoes of their past wouldn't find them so easily. Maya pulled her worn backpack higher onto her shoulder, the fabric thin under her fingers. Inside, amidst textbooks and a single, dog-eared novel, lay the weight of her father's parting words from that morning. Keep your head down, Maya. Blend in. No heroics. We need this place to be quiet. Quiet. That was the mantra of their lives, a fragile piece they chased from town to town. Her father, a man whose past was etched in the lines around his eyes and the disciplined set of his jaw, had taught her many things. He taught her how to read the subtle shifts in a person's posture, the flicker of intent in their eyes. He taught her the fluid grace of movement, the precise application of force, the art of turning an opponent's aggression against them. He had trained her not for sport, but for survival, a legacy of his years in shadows and situations he never spoke about directly. But more than anything, he had taught her the burden of those skills, the necessity of concealing them unless absolutely no other choice remained. This new school, Northwood High, was an aging brick monolith, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over a football field that had seen better days. Students milled about, a chaotic mix of bright colors, loud voices, and the clatter of skateboards. Maya felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the unease of being the unknown variable in a well-established equation. She was of average height, with dark, unassuming hair usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and eyes that observed more than they engaged. Her clothes were practical, chosen for comfort and anonymity, a stark contrast to the curated styles around her. She moved with an unconscious economy of motion, a stillness that often made her seem to fade into the background, a skill honed by years of practice. The bell shrieked, a piercing sound that sent students scurrying towards the main entrance. Maya followed the flow, her gaze sweeping her surroundings, cataloging exits, potential choke points, the general demeanor of the student body. Old habits, David called them. Habits he'd drilled into her since she was old enough to understand that the world wasn't always a safe or fair place. Inside, the hallways were a cacophony of slamming lockers and shouted conversations. The air smelled of floor wax, old paper, and the faint, lingering scent of cafeteria food. Maya clutched the crumpled schedule in her hand, navigating her way to the administrative office to officially check in. The secretary, a woman with tired eyes and a tight perm, barely glanced up as she processed Maya's paperwork, her dismissal a small, daily reminder of Maya's current role, the invisible new girl. Her first few classes passed in a blur of new faces and unfamiliar teaching styles. She sat towards the back, listened attentively, and spoke only when directly addressed, her answers concise and polite. She could feel the curious glances, the whispered assessments, but she kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed but aware. During lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with an almost overwhelming energy. Maya found an empty table in a far corner, positioning herself with her back to the wall, another ingrained habit. She ate her sandwich slowly, observing the intricate social ecosystem around her. The jocks held court at a central table, their laughter booming. A group of artsy students huddled near the windows, sketching in notebooks. The self-proclaimed rebels lounged by the vending machines. And then there were the others, like her, occupying the fringes, either by choice or by circumstance. It was in this crowded, noisy space that she first saw him. Rex. He was tall, with a muscular build that strained the fabric of his Letterman jacket, his hair a carefully disheveled blonde. He moved with an air of confident entitlement, his cronies, two equally imposing figures, trailing in his wake like pilot fish. They weren't just popular. They radiated a kind of unchallenged dominance, and the way other students subtly avoided their path or quieted their conversations as they passed told Maya everything she needed to know. Rex and his crew seemed to thrive on attention, on the subtle fear they inspired. Maya made a mental note. Avoid. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Trouble finds you easily enough, Maya. Don't go looking for it. She finished her lunch, packed her things, and left the cafeteria before the bell, preferring the relative quiet of the library to the simmering tensions of the social arena. She reminded herself that this was just another stop, another period of careful navigation until David decided it was time to move again. She didn't allow herself to think about making friends, about setting down roots. Roots were a liability. Attachments were vulnerabilities. Her father had taught her that too, not through words, but through the constant motion of their lives. As she walked through the less crowded corridors, she thought about the discipline he'd instilled in her, the hours spent in makeshift dojos in rented garages or secluded woods, practicing forms, sparring, learning to control her breathing, her fear, her strength. Control is everything, Maya, he'd say, his voice calm but firm. Control of yourself, control of the situation. Never unleash what you can't manage. And never, ever, use what I've taught you for pride or anger. Only for necessity. Only when there is no other way out. The final bell released her back into the afternoon sun. She walked to the old pickup, the engine sputtering to life with a familiar cough. Driving home, she replayed the day, analyzing, assessing. Northwood High was like any other school in its own way. It had its hierarchies, its predators, its prey. Her job was to remain unseen, unbothered, until the day they moved on. She parked the truck in the gravel driveway of their small, rented house on the outskirts of town. David was in the backyard, tending to a small vegetable garden he'd started, a patch of normalcy in their transient existence. He looked up and smiled, a rare and genuine expression that softened the harsh lines on his face. "How is it?" he asked, wiping dirt from his hands. "It was a school," Maya said, shrugging. "Quiet. As quiet as I could make it." David nodded, his gaze searching hers. "Good. That's all we can ask for." But even as she said it, a small, uneasy feeling settled in Maya's stomach. She had seen the look in Rex's eyes as he'd surveyed the cafeteria, a look of casual ownership, of someone who believed the world, or at least this small corner of it, belonged to him. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that quiet was a luxury not always afforded to the new girl, no matter how hard she tried to blend into the shadows. Her father's lessons were about defense, about protection, but they were also about the difficult choices one had to make when faced with aggression. The choice to endure or the choice to act. For now, she would choose endurance. She would keep her promise. But the undercurrent of the school's social dynamics was a palpable thing, and she couldn't shake the feeling that eventually its currents would try to pull her in. The first week at Northwood High unfolded with a deceptive calm. Maya established a routine, classes, solitary lunch, the library, then home. She perfected the art of being present but unnoticed, a ghost in the hallways. She learned the names of her teachers, the shortcuts between classes, and, most importantly, the patterns of Rex and his two main associates, a lanky, sneering boy named Jet and a heavier, slower one called Brick. They were the undisputed tyrants of the school's social structure, their power seemingly absolute, built on a foundation of intimidation and the tacit compliance of the student body, and, it seemed, some of the faculty. Maya observed them from a distance, the way a naturalist might study a pack of predators. Their arrogance was a palpable force, their laughter often at the expense of others, their progress through the crowded corridors parting students like a ship's prow through water. Her father, David, continued his quiet work, finding odd jobs around town, a bit of carpentry here, some engine repair there. Evenings were spent in their Spartan living room, Maya doing homework while David read or meticulously cleaned the old hunting rifle he kept locked away, a relic of a past he never discussed. Sometimes he would guide her through mental exercises, visualization techniques he said were crucial for maintaining focus under pressure. "The mind is the primary weapon, Maya," he'd repeat, his voice a low murmur. "The body is just the delivery system. Keep your mind sharp, calm, and clear, especially when chaos erupts around you." The initial incidents were subtle, almost dismissible. A misplaced textbook that turned up in the lost and found, covered in a sticky, unidentifiable substance. A locker door that seemed to accidentally slam shut just as she was reaching for it, narrowly missing her fingers. Whispers and snickers that would abruptly cease when she turned her head. Maya recognized the pattern, the testing of boundaries, the casual assertions of dominance. She ignored them, her face an unreadable mask, her movements unhurried. Each time, she would feel a flicker of adrenaline, a deep-seated instinct to react, to confront, but her father's voice would echo in her mind. Blend in. No heroics. One afternoon, during the crowded transition between classes, Jet, smirking, accidentally bumped into her hard enough to send her books scattering across the grimy linoleum floor. "Watch it, newbie," he drawled, not bothering to help, while Brick chuckled beside him. Students hurried past, their eyes averted. A few paused, curious, but none offered assistance. Maya calmly knelt, gathered her books, her expression giving nothing away. Inside, however, a cold knot was forming. This was exactly the kind of petty cruelty David had warned her about, the kind that often escalated if left unchecked. But she was bound by her promise, by the need to protect their fragile anonymity. Later that week, in the cafeteria, Rex made his first direct, albeit minor, move. As Maya sat alone, reading while she ate, his shadow fell over her table. He didn't speak to her, but instead addressed a younger, nervous-looking boy at an adjacent table who had dared to occupy a seat Rex apparently considered part of his territory. "You know, Timmy," Rex said, his voice deceptively pleasant, "some spots are reserved for people who matter." He then casually flicked a piece of food from his tray, landing it squarely in the middle of Timmy's open textbook. Timmy flushed, stammered an apology, and quickly gathered his belongings, scurrying away. Rex and his crew laughed, then settled into the vacated seats, their presence instantly dominating the section. Maya continued to read, or at least pretended to, her senses hyper-alert. She hadn't been the direct target, but the message was clear. This was their domain, and everyone existed within it at their sufferance. The incident with Timmy bothered her more than the minor provocations directed at her. It was the casual cruelty, the enjoyment they derived from someone else's discomfort. It reminded her of things David had said about bullies. They feed on fear, Maya. They test for weakness. Don't show them either, but don't invite a confrontation unless you're prepared to finish it decisively. Each evening, when David asked about her day, Maya would offer a non-committal, fine, uneventful. She knew he could read the subtle tensions in her posture, the guardedness in her eyes, but he didn't press. He trusted her judgment, trusted the training he'd given her. He also knew the cost of drawing attention. One night, as they were clearing away dinner dishes, he paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Remember, Maya," he said, his voice low, "there's a difference between avoiding a fight and surrendering your dignity. Knowing when to walk away is a strength. But knowing when you can't walk away, that's a responsibility. The hardest part is discerning between the two." His words resonated deeply. She was trying to discern, trying to gauge the threshold. How much could she endure, not for herself, but for the sake of their tenuous peace? The culture of Northwood High seemed to enable Rex and his crew. Teachers appeared either oblivious or unwilling to intervene in the subtle undercurrents of student power dynamics. Maya noticed how even some younger staff members would offer Rex a deferential nod or a forced, friendly greeting. Perhaps his family was influential in the small town, or perhaps it was simply the age-old tendency to avoid confronting troublesome but popular students. This systemic indifference was, in many ways, more disheartening than the bullies' actions themselves. It created an environment where such behavior could fester and grow. Maya found herself increasingly isolated, not just by her deliberate efforts to remain aloof, but by the palpable atmosphere of fear and apathy that permeated the school. She wasn't afraid of Rex, Jet, or Brick. Her training had stripped away most personal fear of physical confrontation. What she feared was the consequence of action, the disruption, the exposure, the inevitable upheaval that would force her and David to pack their meager belongings and run again, searching for another fleeting illusion of normalcy. And so, she continued to walk the tightrope, balancing her promise to her father against the rising tide of provocations, wondering how long the rope would hold before she was forced to make a choice that would change everything. The quiet she sought felt increasingly fragile, threatened by the loud, unchecked arrogance of a few and the silent complicity of many. The provocations from Rex and his companions, Jet and Brick, began to shed their subtlety, becoming more overt, more personal. It was as if Maya's deliberate non-reactions were a challenge to them, an affront to their perceived authority. They seemed determined to elicit a response, any response, to confirm her submission to the established order of Northwood High. One rainy Tuesday, as Maya was walking down a less crowded side hallway, Jet and Brick materialized, blocking her path. Jet leaned against the lockers, a smirk playing on his lips, while Brick stood with his arms crossed, a silent enforcer. "Lost newbie?" Jet asked, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow space. Maya simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I need to get a class," she stated, her tone even. "Oh, class is so important, isn't it?" Jet mocked, pushing himself off the lockers and taking a step closer. "Maybe you need a little lesson in Northwood etiquette first. Around here, you show respect to your seniors." He invaded her personal space, close enough that she could smell the stale scent of whatever cheap cologne he used. Maya didn't flinch, didn't back away. She held her ground, her body relaxed but poised, her eyes steady on his. She could feel the familiar calm settling over her, the pre-conflict focus David had drilled into her. She noted Jet's stance, slightly off balance, his weight too far forward. Brick was watching, his usual dull expression holding a flicker of anticipation. "I haven't disrespected anyone," Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. "Just trying to get an education." Jet laughed, a short, harsh sound. "An education in what?" "How to be invisible. You're doing a pretty good job of that, I guess." "But we see you." He reached out as if to poke her shoulder, but Maya shifted her weight almost imperceptibly, causing his finger to brush harmlessly past her arm. It was a movement so slight, so fluid, that Jet barely registered it, though a flicker of surprise crossed his face before the smirk returned. "Feisty," he commented. "Brick, what do you think? Does she need some encouragement to be more sociable?" Brick grunted a noncommittal sound. He was the muscle, not the strategist. The bell for the next class shrilled through the hallway, and Jet scowled. "Saved by the bell, newbie. But don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to get acquainted." They swaggered off, leaving Maya standing alone. Her heart was beating a little faster, not from fear, but from the controlled effort of maintaining her composure, of not reacting in the way her training urged her to. She took a slow, deep breath, just as David had taught her. Control your breathing, control your mind. That evening, she found herself thinking more and more about her father's words. Knowing when you can't walk away, that's a responsibility. Where's that line? How many more accidental shoves, veiled threats, or acts of petty vandalism could she endure before that line was crossed? The school itself offered no solace. During a history class, the teacher, a harried-looking man named Mr. Henderson, had been discussing civic responsibility. Maya had watched as Rex, seated in the back, openly scrolled through his phone, occasionally snickering and showing it to Jet. Mr. Henderson shot a nervous glance their way, but said nothing, quickly looking back at his notes. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes about the prevailing atmosphere. If teachers were unwilling or unable to enforce basic classroom rules with these students, what hope was there for addressing more serious issues like bullying? Later that week, Maya witnessed something that chipped away further at her resolve to remain passive. She saw Rex and his crew cornering Timmy, the same nervous boy from the cafeteria, by the bike racks after school. They weren't physically hurting him, but their taunts were vicious, personal. Timmy was close to tears, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Maya watched from a distance, hidden by the corner of the gymnasium. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene, but the image of her father's weary face, the thought of another hasty departure, held her back. She felt a sickening lurch in her stomach, a mixture of anger and self-reproach. What was the point of all her training, all the discipline, if she stood by and did nothing while someone weaker was tormented? The internal conflict was tearing at her. Her promise to David, their need for a stable, quiet life, warred with the fundamental sense of justice he had also instilled in her. He had taught her to protect, not just herself, but those who couldn't protect themselves, if the situation was dire enough. Was this dire enough? Timmy finally broke free and fled, his face streaked with tears. Rex, Jet, and Brick laughed triumphantly. Maya turned away, her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. She felt like a coward, and the feeling was bitter. That night, she couldn't concentrate on her homework. David noticed her distraction. "Something on your mind, Maya?" he asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated, then decided to speak, albeit vaguely. "There are some unpleasant students at school, Dad. They pick on others." David nodded slowly, his eyes serious. "There always are. How are you handling it?" "I'm staying out of it. Like you said." "And how does that feel?" he pressed, his gaze unwavering. Maya looked down at her hands. "Not good," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. David was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I taught you to be a protector, Maya, not just a survivor. Blending in is a tactic, not a life sentence. There are times when the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action. The key is to choose your battles wisely, ensure the cause is just, and act with precision and control, minimizing collateral damage. You have the tools. You also have the judgment. Trust it." His words didn't give her permission, not exactly, but they acknowledged her struggle, validated her discomfort. They reminded her that her training had a purpose beyond her own self-preservation. He was trusting her to make the right call, to know when that line had been irrevocably crossed. She still didn't know what she would do, but a small measure of the weight on her shoulders seemed to lift. The decision was hers, and with it, the responsibility. The next day at school, she observed Rex and his crew with a new intensity. She wasn't looking for a confrontation, but she was no longer entirely committed to avoiding one if it became necessary to protect someone else. The seed of resolve was beginning to sprout, nurtured by her father's carefully chosen words and her own growing intolerance for the casual cruelty she witnessed daily. The fragile peace she had tried to maintain was becoming increasingly untenable. The escalation Maya had dreaded, yet in some ways anticipated, arrived with a cold, deliberate cruelty that solidified her burgeoning resolve. It happened not to her directly, at first, but to a quiet, studious girl named Lena, who often sat near Maya in the library, absorbed in her books. Lena was small, wore thick glasses, and had a habit of nervously pushing them up her nose. She was the type of student who tried her best to be invisible, a kindred spirit in Maya's quest for anonymity, though Lena's was born of shyness, not strategy. One afternoon, Maya was returning a book to the library when she saw Jet and Brick cornering Lena near a secluded bookshelf alcove. Rex was lounging on a nearby table, observing with a bored, kingly air as if presiding over a minor courtly amusement. Jet had snatched Lena's research paper, a thick sheaf of carefully typed pages, and was holding it just out of her reach, waving it mockingly. "What's this, bookworm?" "Your brilliant masterpiece." Jet sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Trying to get a scholarship and escape little old Northwood?" Lena was visibly distressed, her face pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her paper. "Please, Jet, give it back. It's due tomorrow. It's my final grade." "Final grade, huh?" Jet exchanged a look with Brick, who let out a dull chuckle. "Maybe it needs some editing." With a theatrical flourish, Jet began to rip the pages, one by one, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like malevolent confetti. Lena gasped, a small, wounded sound, and tears welled in her eyes. "No, please." Rex, from his perch, yawned. "Don't be so dramatic, Jet. Just give her the scraps. Maybe she can tape it back together. Teach her about resilience." He smirked. The librarian was at the main desk, too far away to see or hear the quiet torment unfolding in the alcove. Other students in the library either didn't notice or pretended not to, their heads buried in their own work. Maya felt a surge of cold fury, so intense it almost took her breath away. This wasn't a misplaced textbook or a slam blocker. This was the deliberate destruction of someone's hard work, a calculated act of meanness designed to inflict maximum emotional pain. It was the kind of bullying that left deeper scars than bruises. Her father's words echoed with startling clarity. Knowing when you can't walk away, that's a responsibility. This was it. This was the line. She walked towards the alcove, her steps measured, her expression calm, but her eyes held a glint that would have been familiar to anyone who had ever faced David in a serious confrontation. "That's enough," Maya said, her voice low but carrying an undeniable authority that made Jet pause, a torn page still in his hand. He turned, surprised to see her. Rex sat up a little straighter, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Well, look who decided to join the party," Jet sneered, recovering quickly. "The ghost speaks. What's it to you, newbie?" "She asked you to stop," Maya stated simply, her gaze unwavering. "Give her back what's left of her paper." Lena looked at Maya with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. Rex chuckled. "Getting brave, are we? You won't be her knight in shining armor." He slid off the table and sauntered over, Brick falling in his step beside him. Now all three of them were focused on Maya, a tight semicircle of intimidation. "Maybe you didn't get the memo," Rex said, his voice soft, almost a purr, but laced with menace. "We run things here, and you, little shadow, you don't get to tell us what to do." Maya didn't look at Rex. Her attention remained on Jet, who still held the remnants of Lena's paper. "The paper," she repeated, her voice dropping even lower, taking on a steely edge. Jet looked at Rex, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Jet then crumpled the remaining pages into a ball and tossed it dismissively onto the floor at Lena's feet. "There's your precious paper, bookworm. And as for you," he turned back to Maya, his face contorted in a snarl, "you need to learn your place." He shoved Maya hard in the shoulder, expecting her to stumble, to show fear. But Maya didn't stumble. She absorbed the impact, her feet seemingly rooted to the floor, her body a coiled spring. She didn't retaliate, not yet. She simply met Jet's aggressive glare with a look of utter calm, a calm that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. "This isn't over," Rex said, his eyes narrowed as he studied Maya. "Not by a long shot. Let's go, guys. This library suddenly stinks." They swaggered away, leaving Maya and Lena in the alcove, surrounded by the torn pieces of Lena's work. Lena was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. Maya knelt and began to gather the ripped pages. I don't know what to say," Lena whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Thank you for trying." "We'll see what we can salvage," Maya said, her voice gentle now. "Do you have a copy save on a computer?" Lena shook her head miserably. "No, I was almost finished. I was going to type the final draft tonight." Maya looked at the mess of paper. Some pages were only partially torn, others were in shreds. It was a disaster. But the act itself, the casual cruelty, had solidified something within her. Her father had spoken of choosing battles wisely, of just cause, precision, and control. The cause was now undeniably just. That evening, Maya didn't immediately tell her father about the library incident. Instead, she went through her usual routines, but her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and decisions. She thought about her father's training. Observe your opponent. Understand their patterns, their strengths, their weaknesses. Never engage emotionally. Act with a clear head. She had observed Rex, Jet, and Brick. Rex was the leader, arrogant and reliant on his reputation and his enforcers. Jet was impulsive, easily angered, and less skilled physically than he thought. Brick was slow, both mentally and physically, relying on brute strength that was often poorly applied. She knew their usual haunts, their routines. She also knew that her intervention in the library had marked her. They wouldn't let it go. A confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. The only question was when and where. And she realized, with a chilling sense of clarity, that she would not wait for them to choose the time and place. She would not allow them to escalate further to harm someone else. Her father had also taught her about initiative, about taking control of a situation before it controlled you. The next day, she sought out Lena before first period. "I'll help you with your paper," Maya offered. "We could try to piece it together, and I can help you rewrite the damaged sections. I'm a fast typist." Lena looked at her, surprised. "You do that?" "Yes," Maya said. "Meet me in the library at lunch." Throughout her morning classes, Maya was a model of calm attentiveness on the surface, but beneath, she was preparing. She ran through scenarios in her mind, visualized potential confrontations, assessed risks. She wasn't planning an attack, but she was preparing to respond decisively if, or when, Rex and his crew made their next move. She felt a strange sense of focus, the familiar pre-conflict clarity her father had described. The fear of exposure, of uprooting their lives, was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a stronger imperative. The need to act, to protect, to restore a small measure of balance in the toxic environment of Northwood High. The line had been crossed, and she was ready to stand on it. The breaking point arrived with the chilling finality of a slammed door, an ultimatum delivered not in words, but in an act of blatant, public humiliation that Maya could no longer ignore or deflect. It happened at the end of the school day, near the student parking lot, a gray, windswept expanse that always felt exposed. Maya had spent her lunch hour with Lena in the library, painstakingly trying to reconstruct the destroyed research paper. They had made some progress, but it was slow, tedious work, and Lena was still understandably dejected. As Maya walked towards her father's old pickup truck, she noticed Rex, Jet, and Brick loitering near it. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, pricked at her. They weren't looking at her yet. They were focused on the truck, and Jet was holding a can of what looked like spray paint. Her steps faltered for a fraction of a second before she forced herself to continue at a steady pace. As she drew closer, her worst fears were confirmed. Across the driver's side door of the faded blue truck, in garish, dripping red letters, was a single, ugly word: loser. Jet was just adding a flourish, a crude caricature of a face, while Brick watched with a dull grin. Rex leaned against a nearby car, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips as he surveyed their handiwork. This was different. This wasn't just about her. This was about her father, about their life, their sanctuary, however humble. The truck, old and battered as it was, represented their independence, their ability to flee if necessary. It was a symbol of their shared journey, and they had defaced it, violated it. A switch flipped within Maya. The carefully constructed dam of restraint, built from promises and the desire for peace, finally crumbled. The cold fury she'd felt in the library returned, but this time it was accompanied by an icy resolve. There would be no more turning the other cheek, no more strategic retreats. Her father's words about responsibility, about the cost of inaction, resonated with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer just about protecting Lena or any other random student. This was a direct assault on her family. As she approached, Rex finally turned his gaze towards her. His smile widened. "Well, look who it is. Come to admire our artwork, newbie? We thought your ride needed a little personality." Jet and Brick snickered, turning to face her, the spray paint can still in Jet's hand. Several other students were lingering, watching from a safe distance, a silent audience to the unfolding drama. Maya stopped a few feet from them. She didn't look at the graffiti on her truck. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, were fixed on Rex. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, devoid of any discernible emotion. The quiet intensity of her tone seemed to momentarily unnerve them more than an outburst would have. Rex quickly recovered his bravado. "Oh, shouldn't we have? And who's going to stop us? You. He took a step towards her, tried to use his size to intimidate. You've been a real pain, you know that? Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Trying to be a hero. It's time you learn a lesson. I think, Maya said, still in that eerily calm voice. It's you who is about to learn something. She shifted her stance almost imperceptibly, her weight balanced, her hands loose at her sides. It was a posture of readiness her father had drilled into her thousands of times. Rex scoffed. Big words for a little girl. Jet, Brick, I think our new friend needs some personal instruction. Jet, eager to impress, lunged forward, dropping the spray paint can. He threw a wild, telegraph punch aimed at Maya's head. This was it. The moment of decision, the point of no return. Years of training took over. Maya didn't think, she reacted. She moved with a speed and precision that belied her unassuming appearance. She didn't dodge Jet's punch. She flowed around it, her left hand deflecting his arm outward while her right foot swept his supporting leg from under him. Jet yelped in surprise as his balance vanished, and he crashed heavily to the asphalt, the air rushing from his lungs. Before Brick, who was slower to react, could fully process what had happened, Maya had already pivoted. Brick charged head down like a bull. Maya sidestepped his clumsy rush, used his own momentum against him, and applied a precise nerve strike to his shoulder as he lumbered past. Brick howled, his arm going numb, and stumbled into the side of a parked car with a thud, dazed and clutching his shoulder. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. The onlookers gasped. Rex, who had been watching with arrogant confidence, now stared in stunned disbelief, his jaw slack. His two enforcers, the pillars of his reign of terror, were on the ground, incapacitated. What was that? Rex stammered, his bravado vanishing, replaced by a dawning fear. Maya turned her attention fully to him. Her expression was still calm, but her eyes were like chips of ice. I believe you called it personal instruction, she said. Now it's your turn. Rex, realizing he was alone and that Maya was not the timid girl he'd assumed, started to back away. Stay away from me. I didn't even touch you. You defaced my father's truck, Maya said, taking a slow, deliberate step towards him. You tormented Lena. You've made a habit of preying on those you perceive as weaker. Each statement was delivered with quiet conviction. Rex looked around wildly, as if seeking help, but the other students were frozen, watching with a mixture of shock and awe. His usual aura of invincibility had shattered. I'll tell the principal. I'll tell my parents. You assaulted us. Rex blustered, his voice tinged with panic. Did I? Maya asked, tilting her head slightly. Or did Jit attack me first? I believe there are witnesses. She gestured vaguely towards the onlookers, some of whom were now hesitantly nodding. The truth of the sequence of events was undeniable. Maya took another step. Rex, completely unnerved, tripped over his own feet as he tried to scramble backwards and fell unceremoniously onto his backside. He looked up at Maya, no longer a feared tyrant, but a scared, defeated bully. The king of Northwood High was literally on his knees, or rather, on his rear, staring up at the quiet new girl he had so grievously underestimated. Maya looked down at him, not with triumph, but with a kind of weary finality. This is over, Rex, she said. You will leave Lena alone. You will leave me and my father's truck alone. You will stop terrorizing other students. If you or your friends cause any more trouble for anyone, I will know, and we will have another instructional session. Do you understand? Rex, his face pale, could only nod dumbly, his eyes wide with a fear he had so often inspired in others. Maya held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked towards her truck, leaving Rex sitting on the ground and his two cronies groaning. The small crowd of students parted for her, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, respect, and perhaps a little fear of their own. She reached the truck, her hand tracing the still wet, offensive word. The anger was still there, but it was a controlled burn now, channeled and expended. She had done what she had to do. The consequences would come, she knew that. But for the first time since arriving at Northwood High, she felt a sense of lightness, the the burden of indecision lifted. She had made her choice. She had stood her ground. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation in the parking lot was a strange mixture of stunned silence and excited whispers. As Maya calmly got into her father's defaced truck and started the engine, the small crowd of student onlookers began to buzz, their voices rising as the initial shock wore off. Phones, which had been surreptitiously recording the event, were now being openly reviewed. The footage replayed, the unbelievable reality of what they had just witnessed sinking in. Rex, still sitting on the asphalt, was helped to his feet by a couple of hesitant acquaintances, his face a mask of humiliation and disbelief. Jet was groaning, clutching his ribs, while Brick nursed his shoulder, his usual dull expression replaced by one of pain and confusion. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded them for so long had been shattered in a matter of seconds by the quiet new girl. News of the incident spread through Northwood High with the speed of a wildfire. By the time Maya pulled into her driveway, her phone, which she rarely used, was already lighting up with notifications from unfamiliar numbers, classmates, it seemed, who had somehow gotten her contact information. She ignored them. Her first priority was her father. David was in the front yard, pruning a rose bush he'd been trying to coax back to life. He looked up as she parked, his gaze immediately falling on the garish red graffiti marring the truck door. His expression tightened, but he said nothing, waiting for her to speak. Maya got out of the truck, her composure steady, though her heart was still pounding from the adrenaline. "There was an incident at school, Dad," she said, her voice even, "with Rex and his friends. They did this." She gestured to the truck. David walked over, his eyes examining the crude lettering. He touched the paint, still slightly tacky. "And?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, though Maya could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I dealt with it," Maya said. "Jet attacked me. I defended myself." Rex and Brick also tried to intervene. David looked at her then, his gaze intense, searching. He saw no fear in her eyes, no regret, only a quiet determination. He saw the culmination of years of his training, not in the violence itself, but in the control she had clearly exercised. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Are they?" "Bruised. Mostly their pride." David nodded slowly. "The school will be involved, undoubtedly." "I expect so," Maya agreed. "They will try to twist the story. Rex was already threatening to tell the principal I assaulted them. Truth has a way of surfacing, Maya, especially when there are witnesses." "Were there?" "Yes. Many. Some were recording." A small, grim smile touched David's lips. "Good. That simplifies things." He looked back at the truck. "We can paint over this. It's just metal and paint." He put a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of physical reassurance. "You did what you believed was necessary. We'll face the consequences together." The call from Principal Thompson came an hour later. His voice was stern, demanding that Maya and her father come to the school first thing in the morning for a meeting. He mentioned serious allegations of assault and violent behavior. Maya listened calmly, confirmed they would be there, and hung up. The next morning, the atmosphere at Northwood High was electric. Students gathered in hushed groups, their eyes following Maya as she walked beside David towards the principal's office. The usual noisy bravado of the hallways was subdued, replaced by a palpable curiosity and tension. Rex, Jet, and Brick were already in Principal Thompson's office, accompanied by Rex's parents. Mr. and Mrs. Stratton were an imposing couple, expensively dressed and radiating an air of entitlement that mirrored their sons. Rex himself looked sullen, a small bruise visible on his cheekbone where he had likely fallen. Jet had his arm in a makeshift sling, and Brick looked thoroughly miserable. Principal Thompson, a man whose demeanor always seemed to hover between exasperation and resignation, looked particularly stressed. "Mr. Harris, Maya," he began, his tone formal. "We have a very serious situation here. The Strattons, Mr. and Mrs. Cutler, Jet's parents, who were not present but had apparently called in, and Mr. Brolin, Brick's father, also absent, are alleging that Maya brutally attacked their sons without provocation." Mrs. Stratton spoke up, her voice sharp and indignant. Our son and his friends were simply minding their own business when this girl viciously assaulted them. Look at Jet's arm. Rex is traumatized. We demand she be expelled immediately, and we're considering pressing charges." Rex nodded vigorously, a pained expression theatrically applied to his face. "She just went crazy. We were just talking, and she attacked us." Maya remained silent, her gaze calm, her posture relaxed but attentive. David, seated beside her, was equally composed. "Principal Thompson," David said, his voice steady and respectful, "before we address these allegations, perhaps we should consider all the available evidence. My daughter informs me that the entire incident was witnessed by numerous students, and that some of them recorded it on their phones." At the mention of video evidence, Rex's composure flickered. He exchanged a nervous glance with his mother. Principal Thompson frowned. "Video evidence? I haven't been made aware of any." "Perhaps because it wouldn't support the narrative being presented," David suggested mildly. "I also understand that this incident was preceded by the vandalism of my truck on school property, an act also witnessed and perpetrated by the very boys now claiming to be victims." Mrs. Stratton scoffed. "That's a ridiculous accusation. My Rex would never do such a thing. He's a good boy, an athlete, popular." "Popularity is not a synonym for good character, Mrs. Stratton," David replied calmly. "And vandalism is a crime." Just then, there was a knock on the office door. The school secretary peered in. "Principal Thompson, excuse me, but several students are here. They say they have something you need to see regarding yesterday's incident." Principal Thompson looked surprised, then gestured for them to come in. A small group of students, including Lena and, surprisingly, Timmy, entered hesitantly. Lena was clutching her phone. "Sir," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly but firm, I have a video of what happened. Jet attacked Maya first, after they spray-painted her truck." She held out her phone. Principal Thompson took it, his expression growing more troubled as he watched the footage. The video clearly showed Jet dropping the spray paint can and lunging at Maya, throwing the first punch. It showed Maya's swift, defensive movements, and then Brick's clumsy charge. It also captured Rex's initial bravado and subsequent panicked retreat. The audio, though muffled, picked up Jet's aggressive words and Rex's taunts. After watching the video, Principal Thompson handed the phone back to Lena, his face grim. He looked at the Strattons, whose expressions had gone from indignant to uncomfortable. Rex was now avoiding eye contact, staring fixedly at the floor. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Stratton," Principal Thompson said, his voice heavy with disapproval, "this footage appears to significantly contradict your son's account. It seems quite clear that Maya was defending herself after being attacked, and after her property was vandalized." Mrs. Stratton began to sputter, but she still hurt them. "She used excessive force. She's obviously some kind of trained fighter. That's not normal." David finally spoke again. "My daughter is trained in self-defense, yes. A skill I, as her father, felt was necessary for her to possess. She used only the amount of force required to neutralize an unprovoked attack by 3 larger assailants. What is not normal, Mrs. Stratton, is for students to vandalize property and physically assault their classmates without consequence." The principal, faced with irrefutable evidence and David's calm, logical demeanor, seemed to deflate. The power dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. The Stratton's bluster was losing its effect. "This changes things," Principal Thompson admitted, rubbing his temples. "Vandalism, assault. These are serious offenses, Rex, Jet, Brick." He looked sternly at the 3 boys. "Given this new evidence, I will need to reconsider the disciplinary actions." The tide had turned. Maya felt a quiet sense of vindication, but no triumph. This was just another step, another consequence to navigate. The path ahead was still uncertain, but the truth, as her father had said, was beginning to surface. The revelation of the video evidence sent ripples of unease through the Stratton family and their cohorts, but it didn't immediately halt their attempts to control the narrative. Mrs. Stratton, a woman clearly accustomed to getting her way, shifted tactics from outright denial to accusations of entrapment and disproportionate response. Even if there was some minor provocation, she argued, her voice still sharp despite her faltering position. This girl clearly set them up. She provoked them with her standoffish attitude, and her reaction was that of a street fighter, not a normal high school student. She's a danger to the other children. Principal Thompson, she needs to be removed from this school for the safety of everyone. David listened patiently, his expression unreadable. Maya remained silent, allowing her father to navigate the increasingly convoluted arguments. Principal Thompson, caught between the clear evidence on the video and the influential Strattons, looked increasingly weary. Mrs. Stratton, he said, try to maintain a semblance of authority. The video shows your son and his friends initiating the physical confrontation and committing an act of vandalism. Maya's response, while effective, appears to be defensive in nature according to school policy on self-defense. School policy? Mr. Stratton finally spoke, his voice a low growl. He was a portly man with an air of someone used to buying solutions to problems. I donate a significant amount to this school's athletic program every year, Thompson. I expect a certain level of understanding, of discretion. This girl is a troublemaker. My son simply reacted to her disruptive presence. The veiled threat hung heavy in the air. Principal Thompson's face tightened. This was the kind of pressure he undoubtedly faced regularly from well-connected parents. Maya watched him, wondering if he would capitulate. David, however, remained unperturbed. Mr. Stratton, David said, his tone still remarkably calm, but with an underlying firmness that was impossible to ignore, my daughter's disruptive presence, as you call it, has consisted of attending classes and attempting to avoid trouble. The trouble, it seems, found her. As for your donations, I trust they are made for the benefit of all students, not as leverage to excuse the misbehavior of a few. He paused, then added, we are not looking for trouble, Principal Thompson. We are simply looking for Maya to be able to attend school without being harassed, assaulted, or having her property vandalized. If that cannot be guaranteed here, then perhaps Northwood High is not the right environment. But the facts of this incident remain unchanged, regardless of anyone's financial contributions. Just then, Lena, who had remained quietly in the office with the other student witnesses, spoke up timidly. Excuse me, Principal Thompson, but Rex and his friends, they do this kind of thing all the time. They picked on me in the library, tore up my research paper. Maya was the only one who tried to help me, and they spray-painted her truck because she stood up for me. Her voice gained a little strength as she spoke, fueled by a newfound courage. Timmy, the boy from the cafeteria incident, nodded in agreement. They bother a lot of kids. Everyone's just too scared to say anything. The testimony of other students, corroborating a pattern of bullying behavior by Rex and his crew, added another layer of complexity for Principal Thompson. It was no longer just an isolated incident. It was evidence of a systemic problem. Mr. and Mrs. Stratton looked furious at this unexpected chorus of accusations against their son, but their protest began to sound increasingly hollow. Principal Thompson finally sighed, a sound of deep exhaustion. All right, this is clearly more complicated than a simple playground scuffle. I need to review the school's disciplinary code in light of all this testimony and evidence. Rex, Jet, Brick, you three are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Rex's jaw dropped. Suspended? But, Dad, Mr. Stratton looked apoplectic. Suspended? For what? For being victims of this Amazonian? This is an outrage. The investigation, Principal Thompson continued, his voice firming as he finally seemed to find his footing, will look into the vandalism, the repeated allegations of bullying, and the assault shown on the video. Maya, he turned to her, given that you were defending yourself, you will not face suspension at this time, but I expect your full cooperation with the investigation. Maya nodded. Of course. This is unacceptable. Mrs. Stratton exclaimed, standing up. We will be contacting our lawyer. We will take this to the school board. That is certainly your prerogative, Mrs. Stratton, Principal Thompson said, his tone now tinged with steel. In the meantime, my decision stands. The Strattons, fuming, ushered a protesting Rex out of the office. Jet and Brick's parents would be informed of their son's suspensions by phone. Once they were gone, Principal Thompson looked at Dave and Maya. "Mr. Harris, Maya, I apologize that this situation escalated to this point. It's clear there have been ongoing issues that were not adequately addressed." David nodded. "We appreciate your willingness to conduct a fair investigation, Principal. All we ask is that Maya can continue her education in a safe environment." "I will do my best to ensure that," Principal Thompson said, though he still looked overwhelmed. As Maya and David left the office, the atmosphere in the hallway was thick with anticipation. Students who had witnessed the Strattons storming out now looked at Maya with a new level of respect, mixed with awe. The news of Rex, Jet, and Brick's suspension spread even faster than the news of the fight itself. It was an unprecedented event at Northwood High. The untouchables had been touched. That afternoon, David and Maya worked together to remove the graffiti from a truck. It took a lot of solvent and scrubbing, but eventually the ugly red letters faded, leaving only a faint shadow on the old paint. "It's like a scar," Maya commented, looking at the faint outline. "A reminder." David nodded. "Scars could be reminders of battles fought, Maya, and sometimes of lessons learned. Not just by us, but by others too." He looked at her, a rare pride in his eyes. "You handled yourself well today in the office. You let the truth speak for itself." Maya felt a warmth spread through her. His approval meant more than anything. The fight wasn't entirely over. The Strattons were unlikely to give up easily. But a significant victory had been won. Not just for her, but for Lena, for Timmy, and for all the other students who had suffered in silence. The turning point had been reached, not just through her actions in the parking lot, but through the courage of those who spoke up, armed with nothing more than their phones and the truth. The system, however flawed, had been forced to listen. The days following the suspensions of Rex, Jet, and Brick were transformative for Northwood High. The absence of the school's primary tormentors created a palpable shift in the social atmosphere. Hallways seemed less like gauntlets and more like passageways. The cafeteria was noticeably quieter. The oppressive tension that had often centered around Rex's table now dissipated. Students who had once walked with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes began to look up, to speak a little louder, to occupy spaces they had previously avoided. Maya, an unintentional catalyst for this change, found herself the subject of intense curiosity and a newfound, almost reverent respect. Whispers still followed her, but they were no longer speculative or dismissive. Now they were tinged with awe. "That's her, the one who took down Rex. She didn't even break a sweat. My cousin saw the video. It was insane." Maya did her best to ignore the attention, continuing her quiet routine, though solitude was harder to come by. Lena became a tentative but constant companion, her gratitude manifesting as a quiet loyalty. They still worked on reconstructing her research paper during lunch in the library, a task made easier by the absence of potential hecklers. Other students, ones Maya had never spoken to, would sometimes offer a shy smile or a nod of acknowledgement. A few even approached her, not to ask about the fight, but to quietly thank her. "Thanks for, a lanky freshman mumbled one day, his eyes darting around nervously. "Rex used to take my lunch money sometimes." The school administration, prodded by the irrefutable evidence and the testimonies, conducted its investigation. Principal Thompson, perhaps emboldened by the groundswell of student support for Maya and the clear-cut nature of the bullies' transgressions, seemed determined to see the process through fairly, despite the continued pressure from the Stratton family and their lawyers. Mr. and Mrs. Stratton had, as threatened, involved their legal counsel and were making noises about suing the school for failing to protect Rex from a clearly dangerous and overly aggressive student. They attempted to paint Maya as a volatile individual, citing her self-defense skills as evidence of a predisposition to violence rather than a means of protection. David, with his quiet composure and unshakable logic, attended every meeting, calmly refuting their claims and consistently bringing the focus back to the documented actions of their son and his friends. He never raised his voice, never showed anger, but his unwavering defense of Maya and his insistence on accountability were formidable. He even subtly hinted at his own past experiences with navigating complex situations, which seemed to give the school board pause when they reviewed the case. The final decision came nearly 2 weeks after the incident. Rex, Jet, and Brick were given extended suspensions, coupled with mandatory counseling and a stern warning that any further infractions would result in expulsion. They were also required to pay for the repair of any property they had damaged, though David simply repainted the truck himself and asked that any restitution money be donated to the school library fund, a suggestion Lena had shyly proposed. The Strattons were reportedly furious but found their legal avenues limited by the overwhelming evidence against Rex. The school board, after reviewing all materials, including statements from numerous students about past bullying incidents, also mandated new anti-bullying workshops for all students and training for faculty on how to identify and intervene in such situations. It was a more comprehensive outcome than Maya had ever anticipated. Principal Thompson announced the decisions at a school assembly. He spoke about accountability, respect, and the importance of creating a safe learning environment for everyone. He didn't mention Maya by name, but when he spoke about the courage it takes to stand up against injustice, many students turned to look at her. Maya, uncomfortable with the attention, focused on a spot on the gymnasium wall. Later that day, Principal Thompson asked to see her. "Maya," he said, his demeanor much more relaxed than it had been in weeks. "I wanted to thank you, not just for your cooperation, but, well, you've inadvertently helped us address some long-standing problems here at Northwood. It's not easy to change an established culture, but what happened has certainly been a wake-up call." "I just did what I thought was right, sir," Maya replied. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do," he said with a wry smile. "And sometimes it's the only thing to do," Maya countered quietly, echoing a sentiment her father often expressed. The changes at Northwood weren't miraculous overnight. There were still cliques, still occasional unkind words. But the reign of terror by a dominant few was over. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Students felt more empowered to speak out, and teachers were visibly more attentive to the social undercurrents. The atmosphere was lighter, more open. Maya, the quiet girl who had only wanted to blend in, had become a symbol of resilience and quiet strength. She hadn't sought the role, but she accepted it with the same grace and composure she had shown throughout the ordeal. Her father watched these developments with a quiet satisfaction. "You see, Maya," he said one evening, "sometimes, even when you try to be invisible, life has other plans. The important thing is how you respond when you're called out of the shadows." Maya knew their time in Northwood might still be temporary, but the forces that kept them moving could reassert themselves. But for now, a measure of peace had been achieved, not by hiding, but by standing firm. The resolution of the primary conflict had ripple effects, demonstrating that even in a flawed system, courage and truth could, with persistence, bring about meaningful change. The scars on the truck were now fully painted over, but the lessons learned by the Northwood High community and by Maya herself would remain. The final months of the school year at Northwood High settled into a new rhythm, one characterized by cautious optimism and a significantly reduced level of interpersonal aggression. Maya found that the unwanted spotlight on her gradually dimmed, replaced by a quiet acceptance. She was no longer just the new girl or the girl who fought Rex. She was simply Maya, a student who commanded a certain respect, not out of fear, but out of an understanding of her inherent strength and integrity. Lena remained a steadfast friend, their bond forged in the crucible of adversity. They continued to eat lunch together in the library, but now other students would occasionally join them, drawn to the calm and inclusive atmosphere Maya seemed to effortlessly create. Even Timmy, the boy who had been so frequently tormented, found the courage to sit with them, his nervousness slowly giving way to a shy confidence. He even started sharing his passion for astronomy, finding an interested audience in Maya, who listened patiently to his enthusiastic explanations of constellations and nebulae. Inspired by the changes and by Maya's example, Lena, with Maya's quiet encouragement, decided to approach Principal Thompson with an idea. "Sir," Lena had proposed, "what if we started a student-led initiative, like a peer support group for kids who are feeling bullied or just need someone to talk to? And maybe Maya could show some of us some basic self-defense. Not to fight, but for confidence." Principal Thompson, impressed by Lena's initiative and recognizing the positive potential, agreed to explore the idea. He spoke with David Harris, who offered to supervise any self-defense instruction, emphasizing that his focus would be on de-escalation, awareness, and confidence building rather than aggression. And so, an informal confidence and awareness club was born. It met twice a week in the school gymnasium after classes. Maya, initially reluctant to take such a public role, agreed to assist her father. She found that she had a knack for teaching, her instructions clear, patient, and precise. She emphasized control, balance, and using an opponent's energy against them, the core principles David had taught her. The club wasn't about creating fighters. It was about empowering students to feel safer, more self-assured, and more capable of navigating difficult situations. Attendance grew steadily. Boys and girls, athletes and artists, popular kids and quiet ones, all came together, drawn by the desire to learn and to be part of something positive. Even some teachers dropped in to observe, impressed by the discipline and mutual respect on display. Rex, Jet, and Brick eventually returned from their extended suspensions. They were noticeably subdued, their former arrogance replaced by a wary caution. They kept a low profile, avoiding any interaction with Maya or those associated with her. The power they had once wielded was gone, and they seemed to understand that the school was no longer their personal fiefdom. Rex, in particular, seemed changed. The public humiliation and the consequences had clearly had an impact. He was quieter, more observant, and some whispered that he was even doing his homework. One afternoon, as Maya was leaving the gym after a club session, Rex was standing by the exit, looking awkward. "Harris," he said, his voice low, avoiding eye contact. Maya paused, her expression neutral. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For the truck. For everything." It was a mumbled, uncomfortable apology, but it sounded genuine. Maya looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted, Rex. She didn't offer forgiveness or friendship, just a simple acknowledgement. It was enough. Rex looked relieved and hurried away. David, who had witnessed the exchange from a distance, joined Maya. "That took courage on his part," he commented. "People can change, Maya. Sometimes they just need a compelling reason." As the school year drew to a close, Maya found herself reflecting on her journey at Northwood High. She had arrived seeking anonymity and quiet, and instead had found herself at the center of a storm. But through it all, she had stayed true to the principles her father had instilled in her: control, discipline, responsibility, and the courage to act when necessary. She had not only protected herself and others, but had also inadvertently become an agent of positive change within the school community. On the last day of school, as students exchanged yearbooks and goodbyes, Lena gave Maya a small, wrapped gift. It was a framed photo of the Confidence and Awareness Club, with Maya and David standing in the center, surrounded by smiling students. "Thank you, Maya," Lena said, her eyes shining. "For everything. You changed this school. You changed me." Maya felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer sun. She still didn't know what the future held, whether Northwood would be another temporary stop or something more. But for the first time in a long time, the thought of staying didn't fill her with apprehension. She had faced adversity and emerged stronger, not just in her skills, but in her understanding of herself and her place in the world. Her father, watching her interact with Lena and other students, saw the quiet confidence in her bearing, the subtle but profound shift from a girl hiding from the world to a young woman capable of shaping it, at least in her own small way. He knew their journey was far from over, that his past might still cast long shadows. But he also knew that Maya was equipped to face whatever came next, not just with the skills he had taught her, but with the wisdom and compassion she had cultivated within herself. As they drove home in the old pickup truck, no longer marred by graffiti, but bearing the faint, almost invisible scars of that encounter, Maya looked out at the passing scenery of the small town. It didn't feel like a cage anymore, or a temporary hiding place. It felt like a chapter, a significant one, in a story that was still unfolding. And she was ready for the next page, armed with the knowledge that true strength wasn't just about the ability to fight, but about the courage to stand for what's right and the wisdom to know when and how to do so. The quiet new girl had found her voice, not in shouting, but in decisive action and unwavering integrity, leaving an indelible mark on a place she had only intended to pass through.